Esperemos unos segundos para comenzar.
Welcome, everyone. Let's give people a few seconds before we start.
Estamos
Well,
acá.
good afternoon to everyone. It's our session on the Second International Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding. I'm Iván Darío, Valencia. I'll be the moderator of this session. And we'll start in just a few moments. Just for everyone's information, this session has simultaneous interpretation into English and French. Okay, those of you who'd like to use interpretation, you may find the icon on there's an interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can choose a language of your preference. I'd like to make some other announcements on the conference and this session. Okay, so this session is called Territories, Governance, and Environmental Peacebuilding in Colombia. We're very pleased to have you with us today. This is the agenda for a session. I'll be giving a brief introduction to the event. Then Ángela María Amaya Arias from Externado de Colombia University will give her talk on nature as a subject of rights and its relation to environmental peace building in Colombia. Then Mackenzie Johnson, the second panelist, will be talking to us about peace and parks in the Colombian Amazon, protected area governance in the transition from conflict to peace building. The third group of panelists, we have a team of 3 people. They are Cristina Sala, Santiago Andrés Padilla, and Maria del Pilar Salamanca, who will be talking to us about environmental peace in Southern Tolima, resistances, transformations, and new conflicts. And then we'll have a QA session. I'll be moderating that again, and then a QA session where the audience may interact. I mean, some people can ask questions to the panelists. I also want to point out that in Zoom, as you might well know, there's a chat tool where you're welcome to write your questions or comments addressed to the panelists. And those questions will be put together with the logistics support of our session. And some of them will be answered, hopefully all of them. They'll be read to the panelists for them to answer. If they are specific questions or the presenters themselves, they can answer in the chat box. But there'll be a part of the session where we will have the chance for people to ask questions, to voice their questions if time allows. Finally, before we start, look, just like in the other sessions, it's an international conference. Wants to remind you that there is a strict code of conduct. And if you participate as attendees in this session, you commit to abide to this code of conduct against discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. You abide to our policy. So if you witness any inappropriate behavior in that regard, you can report it in these emails or also in the chat box. We have pasted a link where you can see the full detail of this policy to prevent discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Okay, no further ado, let's start with our session. Once again, welcome everyone. We want to welcome all participants. We have over 31 people here in the room. It's great. especially on a Friday afternoon. At the end of this international conference, we hope to see your interest, and we thank our select group of panelists. So again, I am Iván Darío Valencia. I'm a policy coordinator at GGI in Colombia. The Global Green Growth Institute is an international institution that seeks to support governments from different developing countries in their transition towards a green economy and sustainable growth, and with low carbon. In Colombia, we work on policy against deforestation, also policy to favor sustainable agriculture and nature tourism, just amongst others. And we have a partnership with Environmental Law Institute, ELI, based in the US, to provide training. It's a training project for judicial actors, actually judges in Colombia, on deforestation issues. Nonetheless, the experts on peace, environmental peace, have joined us today, and they'll be presenting their views in the presentation. So first of all, we have our first panelist. This is Ángela María Maya Arias. She's an attorney from Externado de Colombia University with a master's degree and PhD from Zaragozas University in Spain. Fulman Dividend Scholars at ELI in 21 at American University in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. She currently teaches and works as an independent consultant with national projects and also international cooperation on deforestation, biodiversity protection, environmental law, climate change, and deforestation, just amongst others. So Ángela will be presenting. Welcome, Ángela. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. So you're going to be presenting about nature as a subject of rights and its relation to peace building, environmental peace building in Colombia. So you have 15 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, let's have you share your screen. I want to thank everyone. Thank you, Iván, for the introduction. I thank you for the invite. I'm very pleased to be here and share with you. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to share my screen now. I think we can see the presentation mode, right? Yep. Okay. Just as Iván said, I'm going to be talking about the Declaration of Nature as a subject of right and its relation to sustainable peace building in Colombia. This is a topic that has interested me for about 4 years, and it's that trend in law where Colombian judges have been declaring very strongly. There's been a little less momentum, but declare different subjects, objects of nature as subject of rights. We have between second instances and territorial judges, there's been about 20 cases or elements of special ecological importance that have been declared subjects of rights, but it hasn't been proven that there are relevant results out of those decisions to protect those resources. But in addition to that, we've seen that many of those declarations or those sentences have established an environmental conflict in the territory, which can threaten the sustainable peace building in Colombia. In that context, I wondered these questions. What relation is there? I'll tell you about that. What relation is there between the Declaration of Nature as a subject of rights and environmental peace building in Colombia? Is there a relation? Is there any connection? Is there any contact point between these two moments? We live in our country. On the one hand, this trend that everything is a subject of rights, I mean, more or less, but then on the other hand, this sentence to encourage environmental peace building. Speaking of nature as a subject of rights, it's something that has been interesting to me from the beginning. I've been very critical to the efficiency, of those sentences or declarations. I've criticized that a lot, and I wanted to see how that works under the lens of environmental peace building. To answer those questions, this presentation intends to present the critical analysis, something very brief. I don't want to go over many of the things that have been said. It's just a different type of analysis of these sentences. Number two, see if the sentences approach conflict and the environmental conflict, and then finally provide some elements to reconfigure or to redefine the relation there is between nature and peace based on a concept of territory, a wider concept, according to the last sentences. I'd like to make an additional disclaimer. It's an analysis that will be taken from the legal perspective. I'm a researcher, lawyer. I work in consultancy, the structuring analysis of projects in the legal sense. But I recognize that these type of issues should be approached from a multidisciplinary perspective. Of course, the relation between territory, environment, governance cannot be limited to critical legal analysis, which is what I am here to share with you. But I think this first beginning of the research it's interesting, something I like to develop in greater depth. I'd like to share it with you in this space. I think it's the right space to do it. And I believe that it's relevant to redefine some concepts or to contribute some guidelines as to how to analyze the topic. It's clear, I don't discuss this, that we need a case analysis that responds to the territorial specificities and also social nuances. This is a first step for researchers, those who are listening and will listen to the talks that come next. There, as a matter of fact, case analysis, they'll be interested to look at the impact that these declarations have had. As I pointed out, and I'm going to begin with the research, I stated this big question. The legal declaration of elements of nature as subject of rights is an instrument to build environmental peace, or on the contrary, it makes the conflict over the environment in the territory more severe. It's just, let's say, preliminary research. I didn't go and ask anybody in the territory what they thought about, but it's not less valid, the analysis, but it's a first step because it contributes with elements in that sense. But I like to have this disclaimer before I start. Okay, the background, this is the first part of the presentation. It's been present in other legal, for example, Bacanwil River, different cases. In the Colombian context, we began to see this transformation of this view, the traditional view of the relation between human beings and nature. I'm going to open parentheses. I think it's been 5 minutes. I'm going to speak more slowly so that the interpretation can flow better. This jurisprudence trend has proposed a change of paradigm from anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, different trends in one direction or others. So there's a greater visibilization, and especially they're more present in the media. I mean, the importance of the nature, the importance of environmental law, and the lack of warranties to protect the environment because of the legal legislation. I mean, the current legislation has not done it well. It has promoted this new trend that intends to protect nature because of the intrinsic value it holds, and not necessarily because of the services that it provides to society. Many theoretical and topics and jurisprudence in the latest year, we can have a statistical lens of the increase in the number of research projects. They have talked about this change of paradigm when they stop seeing man as an element superior than the others and recognize man as part of nature, and they are at the same level. Nature is at the same level. Now, for this analysis, I mean, these elements, I forgot to say something at the beginning, is that I asked myself, I haven't sorted this out with combining pears and apples, if this environmental peace building and the synthesis of nature as a subject of right, these are common topics, but not necessarily can they be analyzed in under the same lens that sentences in Spanish to compare apples and pears goes around in my mind. And of course, this an initial approach. Now, for the analysis I conducted of that universe of sentences that we have received in Colombia, I took 10 ecosystems. The Atrato River from 2016 was the first sentence of the Constitutional Court. The Amazon River, or the Amazon ecosystem to be accepted rights. I had the chance to work for the Ministry of Environment with a part of the compliance team to go enforce that sentence, the Pisva Highlands, the Conveima, Cocora, and Cobello rivers, Cauca River, Pance River.
Magdalena River. We also have Via Salamanca Park. We have Snow Peaks, two rulings, one from the tribunal and another one by the Supreme Court of Justice, Las Hermosas Park from 2020, and Magdalena River, the very last one that I just found, that I found, the latest one. The others are very common. The one on Magdalena River is different. This is a ruling that in the transitional justice. So it has greater significance. Magdalena River had already been declared as lesser subjective. So let's look at the characteristics for this trend. I acknowledge that I am only having 10. This is not a significant number, but if we see that there are 20 elements, I'm revising 50% of them. And I need to mention, like I said, critical analysis that in my opinion, many of these 20 sentences or ruling are copy and paste from the first 4 or 5. There is no contribution, theoretical additional contribution. So this trend aims at providing this greater degree of protection of diversity. The intrinsic value is not only the basis on ecosystemic services that this element provides to human beings, but the intrinsic value. All of these have a change in paradigm. Out of the 10 judicial processes that were analyzed, well, they all mention a change in paradigm, but it's not so evident. I always criticize, we protect the right, or we protect the park as a subject of rights, and then we protect the right of future generations. So there is no anthropocentrism is being lost there, because future rights generations is being protected there. They're not excluding. Out of these 10 rulings, 8 of them are legal guardianships. So this is the anthropocentric nature. So this is the fundamental right guardianship. One is these actions, those that protect civil and collective ones, and one of them is uncondemning ruling. Most of them mention future generations, but only the first 3 so only the first 3 have this specific analysis. They mention they have the concept of future generations. The others copy and paste. Only one of the territories addresses urban problems in Pance River in Valle del Cauca because of the pollution of the river. And only 40% of them acknowledges the presence of traditional communities. 60% does not mention them, does not recognize them. 2 cases, they don't recognize them because they don't exist. That ecosystem does not have an impact on communities, or there are communities, but they were not acknowledged the way they should have been. Now, results. It is very difficult to determine what the results of those declarations have been, and there are some factors. For example, it's impossible to analyze all of them. A participant asked in the previous session if the ruling was complied with for the Amazon. No, evidently not. There are different indicators, formal indicators. There were commissions, plans, or programs were created because does it exist? Does it work? We also have material indicators, what the ecosystem is like, the baseline monitoring, what is the community perception about the compliance or the perception of this ruling or sentence. There are other factors such as time that has elapsed. There was 5-6 years since they were pronounced. So recovering the ecosystem takes long, the pandemic and other factors. Today, we cannot say whether there is this ruling that all has been fully complied with. Let me give you an example. Does it work or not to declare nature as a subject of rights? In this comment, deforestation does not care whether the Amazon has or not rights. So in Twitter, you can hear about forest fires. So this is not necessarily a positive and automatic response. Now, about the second point, I'm going to see how these rulings look at post-conflict or post-agreements in a technical way for me in the rulings that were analyzed. Some premises. It is clear that not all environmental problems are derived to the armed conflict, to the peace accords. No, we cannot blame them of all. There were some things before then. However, sometimes we see it from the environmental peace building. This is a two-way relationship, and these problems that we have, because this lack of precision in some rulings, we can have conflict situations. That was also mentioned in the previous session as well. But it is absolutely clear that what is the environmental issues are determining for past. In Colombia, it has been the victim, the scenario benefit, and now is is a re-victim. The environment is a re-victim as a consequence of what has happened in the past years. Signing the peace accords has taken to lower conflicts, fewer conflicts, but tension for environment, land, they are still there. So there are new challenges. So those are the premises I analyzed those rulings with. They all, those 10 that I analyze an environmental conflict from the generic viewpoint. Social environmental conflict, there are several parts that are in contradictions because of values related to natural resources and land use. 50% of rulings were developed, or they have problems in some MAC municipalities. Those are the municipalities most affected by the armed conflict. So 50% of rulings there. I heard the alarm. I'm going to take 2 minutes. I had said 15, but I'm going to take 2 minutes just to finish my ideas. Not too long. Look here. I know the slide is not very clear because it is a chart. I took each one of the rulings. I analyzed the percentage of ZOMAC municipalities and what the ruling mentioned. In Atrato River and Amazonan rivers, they mention the conflict, but the one that calls my attention is Magdalena River, that this is a condemning ruling. So within the framework of the conflict, is part of this tension. Magdalena River is acknowledged not only as subject of right, but as a victim of the armed conflict, because the river victimizes communities. So narrative is really the way it is narrated, right? How the armed conflict use the river as a victim and as a victimizer. So the rest of rulings with or without municipalities in the armed conflict does not mention it so much. The judge does not think about how that ruling can be as a peace building element. The other ones, I mean, even if they're in territories, they don't have a specific analysis. And I am not proposing to force inclusion so that everything is post-conflict. No. But rulings need to have a dimension, how they are contributed to peace building, or if this is something about pollution, well, pollution is eliminated and then we move forward. Then from my analysis, we cannot also say that rulings have made social environmental conflict has been worsened with a, this will be able to be seen with a specific case analysis. I'm about to finish. And the Amazon ruling and indigenous community. I found this news, but I lived this news. Indigenous community said that they were not they were not involved when the Supreme Court had the ruling. So they were left out. So now to finish, some theoretical elements. I like this definition, this sentence that says, if we don't have processes that contribute to build territories where those who have been excluded and historically dispossessed can live and exert their rights according to the lifestyles and in dignifying conditions, no peace will be possible. So what elements must be kept in mind for a judicial ruling that declares elements of nature as subject of rights is at the same time a sustainable peace peacebuilding instrument? Well, having this comprehensive view of territory, we need to have ecosystem reparation. We need to involve future generations with an analysis, clarify the paradigm, include communities and cosmovisions, and establishing participative governance and management. Understand the social and environmental conflict. It's not the same thing to have a water basin problem as the forest in the Amazon. And we need to know about legal tools, processes, orders, coherent, adequate instruments so that rulings can actually build peace, and they don't separate or they increase this latent conflictivity. Sorry for the extra minutes. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be pending for questions. Thank you, Angela, for this presentation. Very interesting. These rulings we've seen. These elements from our nature, our environmental wealth as subject of rights, but we don't know what that it means in practice. Excellent analysis you bring to the table from the legal viewpoint. So now in the next two presentations, we are going to go to territorial scale. And then in the discussion is to try to integrate both scales, the legal one and the territorial one. So for the next segment, we have Mackenzie Johnson. She is a joint professor of natural resources and environmental sciences in Illinois University in the United States. She explores how governance initiatives globally create local opportunities to improve social justice and sustainability in the environment. Before, she used to work for Wild Conservation Society in Kabul, in Afghanistan. So she knows about the conflict, and she published in different magazines, Conservation Society and Global Environmental Change and others. So this work that she will present, as she will mention, it has partners from Javeriana University, and her presentation is called Peace and Parks in the Colombian Amazon, Protected Area Governance in the Transition from Conflict to Peace. So Mackenzie, you are welcome. You have 18 minutes for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Iván. Thank you, everyone. I apologize. I'm going to be speaking in English today. So I am presenting work that has been done in collaboration with my collaborators at Javeriana. So Leonardo Aya is in the part of the participants, and he conducted much of the field work for this research. But this is largely a collaboration between Luz Rodriguez and myself. It's part of a larger study we've been conducting since around 2018, working in the Department of Caqueta, trying to understand the effect of the peace agreement on environmental governance and natural resource management on the ground, and trying to understand kind of governance trajectories and what has happened in terms of both conservation or natural resource management and peace building. So if there are questions that I can't specifically answer, both Luz and Leo are in the audience and can help provide a different perspective if that would be helpful. So here we go. So our project really looks at natural resource governance conservation in Colombia. So as everybody I'm sure in this audience understands very well, since 2016, we've seen a sustained or increased amount of deforestation and human insecurity, right? And so we've seen environmental degradation, right? This has impacts for livelihood security. We've seen land grabbing, more conflict, increases in attacks against environmental land defenders. And so a big question has been trying to understand why this has occurred, right? How do people understand these trends in Colombia? And so part of the reason that I'm part of this collaboration in Colombia is my background, as Iván noted, in Afghanistan. I worked in West Africa on environmental conflict and peace building issues. And so I think a lot of the narratives that we see in this context in Colombia are very similar across conflict affected contexts generally, right? So it draws on kind of common understandings of these outcomes, right? That deforestation, degradation, conflict, right? In Colombia specifically, there are consequences of the demobilization of FARC, but also weak state presence across FARC's former territories. And so weak state presence or an absent state is often an explanation that's invoked, again, in a lot of post-conflict or conflict-affected contexts. And so there's this idea that biodiverse areas, once protected via gunpoint conservation, right, they effectively become open access and therefore more easily degraded by a variety of different actors. And so often the response to this, again, across a numerous number of contexts, is to build state presence and the rule of law, right? So under the Santos administration, we saw this kind of push to increase community legibility through the construction and expansion of state infrastructure. So essentially building the presence of the state on the ground in those areas. And then under Duque, right, this is kind of transitioned to interesting piece with legality, paz con legalidad. And so, right, has been kind of the overarching response or the understanding of the problem in, I think, in both research and in kind of larger circles. And so part of this project, what we're trying to do is really challenge these assumptions on the need for this kind of environmental leviathan, right? That the state comes in and fills in all of these blank spaces where, right, there's this kind of absence of power or a governance vacuum. And so again, we're looking at this through kind of this larger project ongoing in Caqueta. And right, to kind of tackle this, these ideas, we pull on three specific areas of the literature. So we look at environmental peace building and peace building, which increasingly, especially in the peace building literature, we see this kind of criticism of this blank slate mentality. I've done a lot of work that kind of criticizes this idea that, right, once a kind of armed actor demobilizes during any kind of peace process, that, right, there's just nothing there and it has to be filled in. We saw that a lot in Afghanistan as well. Instead, what we often see on the ground is the need to kind of reconcile these overlapping and very contradictory governance systems that are happening at multiple scales. And this can be both in the formal realm, right, of the state, as well as informal institutions. And so rather than kind of absent or a governance vacuum type of landscape, our argument is that you should think about these as very complex governance landscapes that need to be kind of deconstructed and understood. And so then we're also bringing in the literature on conservation and protected areas. So this idea of the need to reconcile biodiversity conservation with, right, the very real role that rural livelihoods and economic growth play in peace building processes, right? Both of these things, conservation and livelihoods, are essential elements of peace. And then we also pull on the literature on environmental justice, specifically looking at recognitional and procedural justice. So within these very complex governance landscapes, who gets recognized, why? How does this affect their ability to maintain access to critical natural resources? And this is from our work in our 2021 World Development paper, where we really see justice as kind of a critical mechanism for peace building. And so within drawing on these kind of three literatures, our purpose is to kind of apply these lenses to a case study looking at institutional transformation over time in a particular protected area context. So this is in the Department of Caqueta. And our question in this paper, and we're still kind of writing this, so any kind of questions or critiques you can offer will be very much welcome to kind of improve what we're thinking about and writing about. How can we use the governance history to understand contemporary peace building and conservation challenges within this context? And so what Leo did in the field was really asking people on the ground about a period of time between 2002, 2019. And what happened was people kind of chunked that time into three periods, essentially from 2002 to 2005 as the first period, 2010 to 2012 as the second, and then 2016 onward as the third. So I'll be kind of looking at those 3 periods of time in terms of what he found on the ground. And so the area that we are working in is in the municipality of San Jose del Fragua. And so this is the outline in red here. I hope that you can see my clicker on the screen. Sorry for the Zoom dog interruption. Leo was specifically working in kind of 2 communities on the ground, Bosque Alto and El Diamante. There's also an indigenous reservation in this area. It's right here, very small in yellow, right? And then the protected area is outlined in black here. So this is the context in which we were working, where we had a number of overlapping actors, including FARC, right? The Colombian government itself, the communities, and then the indigenous reservation or community. These are the Inga. And then, right, so Leo and Luz were on the ground in 2019, at the end of 2019, conducting interviews and workshops in both of these communities, as well as participant observation. So this was a qualitative study. So the protected area itself was planned, the establishment was planned in around 1995. In 1999, the government of Colombia, Ministry of Environment, signed an agreement to establish a special management area. And the protected area was formally declared in 2002. It was the 47th protected area in Colombia. And what was interesting about this particular kind of effort was that there was indigenous recognition. So it was one of the first protected areas to occur under the figure of kind of co-management. So there were specific conservation objectives within these kinds of agreements that aim to incorporate the cultural aspects of the worldview, Inga worldview, in protected area conservation. Now, on the flip side, despite indigenous recognition and the recognition of the reserve or the reservation in this area, the 2 campesino communities were not recognized. So there was about 251 families that were kind of using or occupying lands productively within what became the boundaries of the protected area. These occupants were not consulted about the protected area, and in fact didn't actually recognize what was happening in terms of protected area establishment until they were contacted in 2005 during a census. And so to understand kind of within this context, what kind of governance arrangements did we see emerge over time? And so, right, in this first period, when we have this early establishment of a protected area in 2002, 2005, what we actually see is kind of the emergence of a parallel governance system where the de facto governance authorities on the ground is FARC, and in some ways communities as well. And so I'm sure, again, as most of you in the audience know, FARC imposed rules around conservation rules, especially around water conservation, deforestation, wildlife conservation, and then obviously coca production. And so, right, there was a lot of, and people that we talk a lot about the impact of these rules in terms of conservation, that they were successful in many times at conserving the forests. And so these rules were monitored and enforced through the kind of communal governance bodies on the ground. And right, these rules were strictly adhered to. And so, you know, an interesting aspect of these is that despite FARC having kind of that primary governance authority, we still have kind of intermediate variables that still essentially shape, right, governance structure. So coca production in particular mediated the extent to which communities were able to kind of either self-govern or participate in governance with FARC. So for example, in El Diamante, they were more dependent on coca production, which meant, FARC had a much greater presence in that community, and therefore the JAC, the junta was, right, much less able to kind of establish its own regulatory authority. It was much more under the thumb of FARC, versus in Bosque Alto, there was less coca production because of environmental factors. It was less suitable for production there. And therefore, FARC kind of established less of a presence, which allowed the junta to kind of impose itself more in terms of ability to kind of create rules. Nonetheless, they were based on what FARC was doing, but we saw that kind of internal variation, which will matter a little bit down the road, but I just wanted to mention that. And so these communities, right, despite being kind of under this very vertical structure of FARC, engaged in both licit and illicit productive activities within the protected area. So they were still able to meet some of those productive needs, livelihood needs, despite kind of not having any kind of horizontal parity with the FARC. Now, at the same time, right, it's not that the state was absent, but we have things kind of going on in parallel in the back. So the state declared the protected area in 2002, although this is basically a paper park. So the authority wasn't recognized, protected area borders were not recognized. And so the territorial sovereignty of the Inga was essentially null and void under FARC. And again, critically, the state really did not see peasant communities as having rights or the need to be consulted in this. And so, right, that really undermined the relationship between those communities and the state. And then that was kind of compounded by Plan Colombia, where we have kind of aerial spraying and fumigations. So the state is seen as perpetrating violence anyway. So this really weakens that relationship between campesinos and the state, whereas kind of there's a more horizontal cooperative relationship between indigenous peoples in this area and the state. And so if we kind of map out what this looks like, right, we have very vertical governance structures with the campesino communities kind of having this, I put them at a little bit of an elevated stature because, right, they have, especially given coca production and what was happening, there's some regulatory agency, they're able to produce within the protected areas and meet some of their livelihood needs, right? They have little state recognition, which still makes them highly vulnerable, but right, in comparison to the Inga and the reservation, right, they had no territorial sovereignty within this kind of structure. And FARC was inhibiting, right, their access to the state. And so at the same time, right, of this governance structure, we have a protected area that's set up, even though it's kind of imaginary at this point to, this side, but we have kind of Inga and the state collaborating to create this protected area, which invites in international actors. And so we have these two parallel structures going on at the same time. And so this happens for a while. We get what we think of as mixed conservation and security outcomes because of all of these different kind of actors who are, implementing rules to conserve at the same time that we have aerial fumigation going on and was pushing people into the park further, right? So we get these very mixed outcomes based on all of these kind of collision of all these factors. And so as this extends over time into kind of 2010, 2015, right, we see the state actors, especially within the protected area, kind of drop out at this point because of an intensification of the conflict. And so I kind of just dropped them out of the picture for a little while as it was not safe for these actors to be working in the protected area at this time. But we have an increase in the presence of the Colombian army and an increase momentarily in the fumigation. And so, right, the army presence and the intensification of aerial spraying undermines these community relations even more as they come naturally to be associated with the establishment of the protected area, which was finally recognized by the campesino communities in around 2005. Around this time as well, the Ingas bought land in the village of El Diamante to try and physically connect the reserve that had been established with their reservation to try and kind of strengthen that bond, despite at the fact at this time, right, they still have very little kind of territorial sovereignty under the FARC presence. And so again, right, over this time, we still have mixed conservation and security outcomes for a variety of actors as they're all kind of interacting within this landscape. And so by the time we start getting to the peace agreement in 2016, the peace agreement and the demobilization of FARC essentially strengthens the role of actors who have been in kind of this parallel and external structure. So the state and the indigenous reservation are able to kind of fully establish the protected area. And right, this brings in international partners. And so the protected area borders are implemented. And so we have kind of this enhancement of Inga territorial sovereignty as a result of the peace agreement, right? They're able to implement some of the rules of conservation that they had not been able to before, to limit productive activities in the forest in the protected area. And so, right, this means that the state can impose restrictions that weren't available to them before on campesino activities within the protected area, and the state embraces strict conservation, and productive activities in the protected area essentially become illegal. So we have these kind of top-down governance structures that continue to marginalize campesino communities despite the kind of peace agreement. And so if we look at this, and I think I just heard my time as well, so we've all of us have timed this very poorly. I'll just finish up. So if we look at this, right, the kind of positioning of our protected area, or of our governance landscape changes. So we have kind of different actors on the top, but what ends up happening is still a vertical structure with casino communities on the bottom, right, with what kind of still very passive agents and no ability to kind of participate in these governance structures. And so, right, this maintains our hierarchical governance patterns where we have selective recognition of these kinds of participants and selective participation in their ability to kind of influence access to and use of natural resources. So this means that even at this point, beyond the peace agreement, we still have mixed conservation and security outcomes, and especially at the community level, because of how these kind of new governance arrangements are affecting the most vulnerable, which at this point are still campesinos. And so what we saw in this kind of case study is the persistence of a top-down governance model, even as the constellation of actors shifts over time. And so it really highlights the importance of recognitional and procedural justice and understanding kind of who kind of moves in and out of vulnerable positions over time, right? Because the vulnerability of particular social groups contributes to persistent marginalization, which affects both conservation and outcomes and the ability to build and maintain peace. And so we see these kind of persistent mixed outcomes in terms of conservation and security, because especially people in those two communities are responding to changing incentives over time. And so I'll stop there and can answer questions in case anything was unclear at the end. So apologies for going over time as well, and thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie, for this very interesting presentation. So any question, we will remind the audience, it can be directed to the speakers in the chat so that we can compile them at the end for the Q&A session. Now I'm going to call Cristina Santiago. Santiago, can you share your screen? And Cristina. Okay, yeah. Cristina Salas, she's Senior Associate in the International Department in Norway, in England. Can you have it in the presentation mode? Please, Santiago. Okay, great. She is a doctor from a Spanish university, and she's worked in the United Nations Programs for Development in Colombia and the Observatory of the Relations between the European Union and Latin America, and designing projects that transform Colombian conflict based on participative methodologies based on communication as a tool for research. We also have Santiago Padilla. He's a politologist in Ibagué University. He has a master's in the National University of Colombia and Territory Post-Conflict. He has experience in peace building and conflict analysis in Colombia, especially in the south of Tolima. And we have Maria del Pilar Salamanca. She's a psychologist. She has a master's in psychology. She's a researcher in the faculty of Ibagué University. She works on peace building, resilience from victims, women and organizations, local organizations, and convivence and citizenship, and social educational models, prevention and rehabilitation of crimes. So we have a very nice panel, 3 people in this collaborative research. So I'd like to pass on the floor to them. They will all present, and I understand that you start, Maria del Pilar. Am I right? Yes, I'm starting. Yes, go ahead. Santiago, Cristina, you're also welcome. You have 18 minutes. Please be mindful of time so that you can have time, we can have time for discussion. Thank you, Iván. Good afternoon, everyone who's here in this space. We are going to present the results related to a research project, Environmental Peace and Territory Post-Conflict. I'm going to speak about the project, the school, and the methodology that was developed. Santiago will speak about the contextualization, and Cristina will talk about results. So can we go back, Santiago, to the map? Yes. Our project is developed in Colombia, Tolima department, as you can see on the right, in the south of the department. Municipalities that have been affected by violence, and it's called as red zone. A lot of presence of guerrilla members and paramilitaries as well. So that's how we developed our project. Thank you so much. Go ahead. Well, this project, School, Territory, and Post-Conflict, the idea was to research how organizations and other institutions of south of Tolima contribute to peace building. Those organizations and communities were part of the municipalities of Ataco, Chaparral, Planadas, and Rio Blanco, both in the rural and urban areas. Our project, our school, territory, and post-conflict asks 2 questions. What impact has the armed conflict has had in schools, and what transformations has it brought about in the school environment? How organizations and schools have built or build peace. This, we did it along with Ibagué University, East Anglia University, and a foundation. Most of these municipalities have this coffee region. We had men's groups, women's groups, to think about the territory, the role women play in the territory, what it meant to have processes, peasants processes in the regions. We also find young people with a vocation on environmental issues. Our research was transforming, and this has this horizontal approach. So building knowledge was done jointly with between researchers from universities and the communities. So we were able to organize ourselves, reflecting about inequalities in those places where researchers have in their different villages and in small municipalities as well. This type of investigation, this type of research comprises tools that serve communities. There we could have experiences, everyday we have in territories, and this is a way of peace building. So to show from bottom to top in communities. So these research tools were participatives that we had workshops in each organization. They felt at ease to be able to talk there at homes, at courts, I mean, like sports courts, and all of these, they were adapted to particularities, missions that they had in different characteristics. So we also had dialogue workshops amongst organizations so that we can have dialogues between each organization, having networks and acknowledging them, what they were like in the territory. So when first gathering that we had those thought rooms, how we feel, what we think, what we want to have in the territory. Another one was peace missions, and the last one, because of the pandemic, we had virtual gatherings for schools and peace, and we were able to think about them and to see how we are doing, how the pandemic is affecting, and how we saw one another in the future. I'm going to speak about the regional context in the south of Tolima in terms of peace and conflict. Cristina will present the results about this. So just like Pilar mentioned, the south of Tolima has been this region, Ataco, Chaparral, Planadas, and Rio Blanco. This region has historically suffered the armed conflict. The first violence wave that was political parties during the 1950s, and the second wave when the FARC guerrilla members were better structured, and conflict between guerrilla members, paramilitary members, and the state. So the dynamics of conflict, I'm not gonna delve into it, but I'm just going to mention that it was kept with some changes. What this fight between guerrilla and paramilitaries, at some other times it was a fight between the state and guerrilla organizations. This last stretch from 2008 to 2011, that's when the region lived the strongest conflict until 2012. In 2012, something very important happens within the context of peace and conflict, the situation there, because there is decrease in armed violence that year. This is after aggressive coming into the state, the aggressive presence of the army, and they removed FARC from the south of Tolima, and they went to Valle, and they went to Cauca from Tolima. So let's say that this year, different authors like Barrios and Aponte starts integrating in a better way to the rest of the country and to the center of the department. For example, connection channels. With this moment, they start. They are built. What we have is the road connection. There is a social and cultural connection in the department through the coffee market. The coffee market at the national level by the Coffee Federation, and there is also a special coffee market at the international level. After that first move with the army, that is in the Uribe administration and part of Santos administration, the state started implementing programs based on stabilization. And since 2016, with the signature of peace accords with territorial peace. What does that mean? Greater intervention of the state with institutions to provide justice, institutions that aimed at providing basic services and social services. So after 2012 and even more in 2016 after peace accord signature, then these territories linked to the country, to economic, political, and social circuits, even at the international level. So this brings new problems, excuse me. So this brings social environmental problems in the territory along with possibilities. People start detecting and they start reporting within the framework of the project that there is this fear because of the expansion of the agricultural crops, coffee monocrops. So this is a result of the connection of this territory to those new economic circuits after 2012, and they were even enhanced in 2016. There are social environmental conflicts. They were present before 2012 and before 2016. They increase in the territory. Let me give you the example. There in Ambeima River, there was this power plant that was not welcomed by peasant communities, and the project to build electric towers in a snow peak close to Rio Blanco, close to Valle del Cauca.
There was a chance to have illegal mine exploitation, or there was an increase in the illegal mine exploitation. That was exactly at the moment when the peace agreement was being signed back in 2016. That was some work we did before that project with the university. So in this context, that's how we see the results that my partner Christine is going to present to you. Okay, we can share how environmental organizations in the south of Tolima has received or have perceived peace thanks to the environmental activism and in the context that Santiago has told us about, and with the methodologies explained by Maria El Pilar. We're going to start talking about the organization that is an environmental organization, and we're going to see the main interpretations that we have carried out and the findings of the research. And it was research focused on the use of participation methodologies, and we have asked about from different views. The testimonials that I'm gonna mention that we have highlighted, they have been collected in the workshops that we have shared with the organizations through interviews. As I said, the foundation, Environmental Foundation FUPAR, is an organization formed by young people. They are people who protect the environment, they love the environment, and they devote to it. FUPAR comes from the possibilities that arise once the armed actors leave the territory, so other institutions of the state, other NGOs go into the territory, arrive there. Before, there was a big gap between the zones and the institutions because of the conflict. In this area, like Maria Pilar said, and in all the south of Tolima, they had been stigmatized as guerrilla members. Other organizations that have worked and researchers of the project, they don't have the environmental concern as the main focus, but they continue to realize that environmental care is one way to protect their territory. That's why we took them into account. So this research work, we have established with all these organizations a dialogue of wisdom, and has been useful to nurture the inquiries of other communities. And they are united in favor of the environment and to protect the environment. We can say that the learning opportunities and collective and individual spaces is something we have shared with them. And it has helped in three senses or three interpretations, as we call them. The first one is the meaning of the environment as a peace element, also the care of the environment for the protection of the territory and the arrival of citizens that protect the environment. We'll see one by one. The first interpretation is what we have called resignification of the environment as an element of peace, an alternative of peace. The indigenous communities understand the environment as a space that is live, that it also gives life, but of course you talk about the care of the environment in this context of war was something difficult because, like I said, the environment was occupied by wars of peace. Often it's this scenario where it's possible to talk about the environment as richness, natural richness as a resource to help with their products and life. The guerrilla exercised the power, especially to keep the control the territory. They said what trees they could cut down or what trees could not. And as Jason said, he's one of the leaders of the organization, SUPAT. They said that the territories were in peace, but it was not necessary for a non-group to be behind them, but they themselves were able to create awareness amongst the community to protect the environment. In that sense, we need to highlight the role that the communities played and the importance they give to the water bodies. That has been clear in the south of Tolima, and it's been key because I think the main water sources of the territory are protected. For them, this was something important. It was sacred almost, and it was after the agreement, the water bodies unify the territories that have been impacted by violence. I mean, they didn't rely on the other communities. They didn't trust them. It's significant that the guerrilla used the Saldaña River as a way to get rid of the bodies of the people they killed. So the river was associated to conflict violence, and of course, they were afraid of it, and it was not a natural resource that they would appreciate. On the other hand, the water sources were seen as resources and actors to do their life projects in the territory. For example, in Rizalda, there are some lakes or lagoons, and they create a microclimate in the territory, and it's more agreeable, it's nicer, and they're used for irrigation and for animals. The communities then understood that their job was to reforest the micro basins and use them properly, and that they preserve that for the future generations. So the associations, Aprocal y Azocarama, where we worked there, they started a reforestation program of the river basins, and they have planted 20,000 trees, especially native species. ASOMED, on the other hand, is the Association of Women and Business Women in Herrera, Tolima. They work at Rio Blanco. They work to make people aware, the community aware of what they call the need to plant water. One of the participants explained that plant water means to reforest the territory with trees that help keep the minerals and the water in the soil. It means to recover the species that are native to the territory. They benefit the territory and they help us keep the water basins alive. The second interpretation that we've identified together with the communities, it relates to the care of the environment as an access for the protection of the territory or the recovery of the territory. As I've said before, and Santiago put it too, the territories before they were occupied by the guerrilla and the FARC, they were under their supervision. The FARC avoided that there would be more land for agriculture and to move on to the highlands after the FARC left. What has happened is that the peasants and the business people, they have started to expand and overexploit the territory. The peace agreement by itself does not inspire the need to take care of the territory amongst the community, but that chance, as we have said, and the organization said, they can recover the territory so that they don't become the space of new conflicts, either environmental or violent conflicts. What does that mean? To re-territorialize, they make up that word. It has to do with bring sense back to life here in the territory. The actors, they come to the territory and they do not own the territory. So the communities are doing this based on their own needs and their dreams. And of course, the environmental component is one of the factors. Now about the future dreams and to respond to our needs, environmental peace is defined by Jefferson Rodriguez. Is one of the organization leaders as something where all these issues that arise and they were there could be a collective solution, and it's a starting point as to how they conceive the territory. Environmental peace is not something static, but it calls us to reflect and to build the future. The network goes through the community and their soaring territory and the natural resources that also has to do with the recovery of the stories and the traditional knowledge, the native seeds. It's an exercise to re-exist the communities, not only to resist, but also to go back to their territories, occupy their territories, and create new ways of living there. And this impacts their peasant identity that has been impacted by the war and the armed actors for many years. So, Asomet, for example, they want to preserve the ancestral knowledge, and especially the knowledge on the medicinal plants. They're strengthening a garden of the medicinal plants. Also, the other association believes it's important to preserve the Pijao knowledge. It's indigenous community that inhabits that territory. They're present in Risaralda, in Chaparral. So they want to make sure that their experience and the populations that settle in the territory and whose knowledge is important for natural resources, and they don't want that to get lost. As Santiago put it, we must highlight the role that they have played in this territory of Tolima as a way of to recover the territory. Must highlight it because they play an important role. And it helps environmental peace because coffee crops seem like a way to reach economy autonomy in these territories that had been flagged as red zones during the conflict. But coffee also degrades the territory. So the associations of the community, they're looking for a combination of the productive knowledge and combine it with the more ecological production, and also with the old knowledge, for example, the use of plantain shades that benefit the coffee plants and the soil. The fact that they want to recover the territory in this part of the post-agreement once the FARC left the territory, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be a tension, or there won't be any tensions, or that there will be further degradation of the territory because there are these activities. Finally, the third interpretation of our dialogue has to do with something we call the appearance of citizens who protect the environment, who care for the environment. We have worked with two organizations of young people, Herrera Juvenil and another one, FUPAD, and they both understand there's a need for a generational change, as the first speaker said, and change the view what to take care of the environment and the territory means. They recognize themselves as alternative generations, and young people, they want to make sure that in the future the territory will be friendlier to the environment, and of course to get a chance, to have a chance, an alternative to stay there, to remain in the territory, and they don't have to leave to the cities to get trained, to get educated, and forget about the field, the land, as another way of violence against the communities. So we see how this life story from the communities in the south of Tolima right now after the agreements, it means understand the environment as its care as a peace proposal. So the interpretations that arise from these actions, it means peace construction, something that they have not included in the agreements, but this research process that we conducted has taken into account. So this peace, environmental peace, as a way to act in the world. For you to know more about our project and the products, and look at the stories and how they understand peace, there's a participatory video they have conducted. We want to share our website. The video is on our website. So if you can access the website, maybe Santiago, it's also in the chat box. There's a link so you can explore it more. there in the website. I don't know if we can see it or not, or you can visit it later. There it is. That's our website. And you can see, in addition to getting more information about the projects, what the pillars are, what the research pillars are, you will find a chapter that is toolbox. Part of the toolbox, you can find, if you are researching about environmental peace, you can find some tools for methodology, and in products, you'll find all the community products that we have spotted. These are maps, books, and videos that I told you about. So it's a good moment for you to know that this information there. There's some also products that are translated into English, that this book that was written by the Women in Chaparrana book that summarizes their research, and that you can find what the process has been like, what I have summarized so much to be able to participate in this second conference that we are so pleased to be here. Having said that, we want to encourage you to visit our website. Thank you, and we are willing to answer questions, or you can contact our emails.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cristina, Santiago, Maria del Pilar. I invite all panelists to turn on their cameras so that we can have a Q&A. We don't have much time, but the idea is to be able to ask some questions, and we can share reflections about these three presentations. I was fascinated with the presentations, really, and the studies, case studies that were shown. I see on the one hand that our country has so many experiences. Normally, one only sees from the most conflicted territories, those erratic cases, but on very few occasions you listen about these results, positive results within the post-conflict era. Like in the south of Tolima, we just heard from with experience that you tell us about, this experience that has positive points and some things that need to be solved in Caquetá. There is this imposed governance by the guerrilla shared with indigenous communities and the state, where peasant communities need to be empowered, and we're transferring there, we're going there. And in Tolima, we see how communities have made environment a reason of being, to show how they're current in the territories, so that they can have their governance systems that do not only depend on the state, but that they can figure it by themselves as well. So that's very interesting. But let's not forget that Colombia has very conflictive areas with dramatic stories, terrible stories we all know about. So in many of those, they are addressed in the rulings. Angela mentioned, like Atrato River has been victim of illegal mining. Almost all fish are poisoned there in that river, or like the Amazon ruling. So there is deforestation on high scale, like it was not seen before. So this has worsened because of climate change as well. So now going to a reflection, a summary. I believe that there are many environmental conflicts, but environmental conflicts are not automatically a negative indicator, because conflicts are function of, one, people who are concerned about the environment. If there weren't people who are concerned about the environment, we wouldn't, I mean, everyone would be destroying, and there wouldn't actually be someone to oppose environmental destruction. That happened a lot before. There was destruction, but there were not defenders. Nowadays, we do have these defenders. So normally there's someone who is opposing this destruction. So that's why there is a lot of environmental conflictivity. There's lack of parity amongst interests. I also see that conflicts depend on this greater power from different stakeholders. This reivindication to healthy environment and environmentalists, scientists, they have more power in reivindication of rights. So that's why there is more conflictivity somehow. But conflictivity is a function as how differences go about. So Colombia has it in many senses because differences are sorted out with violence, intimidation. But in other cases, there's reivindication, construction, and new ways of dialogue and governance that we go for. So it's also solved from the legal viewpoint. That's what Angela showed us. So today's experiences, they show this array, this analysis, what environmental conflictivity is in Colombia, how it is being solved from different perspectives. Now, there was a question I had for Angela. Colombia stands out by having high progressive standards in environmental law. It is well known because of this, but many times there is a lack of connection or apparently a lack of connection between the reality of the territory and what the ruling seeks. So should laws or rulings be less ambitious and more actually connected to what actually can happen on the field, because we're in Cundinamarca and not in Denmark? So this is a question for Angela. Thank you, Iván, for the question. It is difficult. The question you ask is difficult because it is not about not being ambitious, but what I think is that things should not be invented without testing whether they work. Innovative answers, new trends of environmental law, but there are new things that need to be tried out in the country. They need to be applied. It is more about effectiveness of what already exists. There are already environmental authority competences to provide environmental damage for administrative action processes. There are already legal processes. There are preventive measures. So what already exists needs to be applied. So for me, the answer, whether to be less ambitious and more grounded to the territory, I think it's more about finding the tools or seeing why the state is not being efficient, why what we have today is not being complied with, why aren't they efficient? You said it. So at the international level, we went at the national level, we know that those standards or those regulations are not complied with. So instead of creating new standards and newer ones, we need to see what happens what we have today. Why doesn't it work? What standards we need to see why it is not working? Is it participation? Is it the way communities are involved, those that use resources? Is it corruption? Is it institutionality? So there are many factors. I believe that my answer would go in that sense. Thank you. Thank you, Angela. We heard about Tolima and Caquetá cases, jurisprudence. So this question is for Mackenzie and for the group from the south of Tolima. So in each one of your case studies, what role those ambitious laws and jurisprudence play, those that we've had in the courts in Colombia, in solving these environmental conflicts in territories you have studied? So what is the role of those rulings, as like the ones that Angela showed? I mean, are inhabitants of those regions backed up by those laws, or are they skeptical and far away from those rulings? What can you tell us about this? I don't know who'd like to start, probably Mackenzie or the group, or And Cristina or Santiago or Maria, whoever. Go ahead. I can go first. Okay. The objective of our project was not to delve into rulings. We can see the relationship between environmental institutions with the population. This is something what Angela mentioned. So this is applying these laws. This is an institutional or this is institutional issue, or this is corruption. So what we found within the framework of our project, when we conducted all these gatherings with these communities, is that there is reluctance to collaborate with institutions because of the past role in the armed conflict, because they were absent, or it was only the national army, the only one present there, or to the coercive approximation like the regional autonomous corporation in Tolima in relation to communities. So one of those communities that work with us, FUPAD, they have also worked with the environmental diagnosis on the territory. And they've said how when they started, there was this kind of not wanting in how they were able to overcome having new trust channels with communities. So this is one part. The other part we can talk about is that within the territory, there are new institutions that land, others that are created in relation to peace. And for example, in PEDETs programs, those that have the territorial view, getting close to people, to actually building peace in the state, there have been new opportunities. Anyways, they have been criticized. Of course, there are stakeholders that have formulated them. So let's say that these are small answers to your question. Thank you. Thank you, Santiago. Mackenzie, what can you tell us about this question?
I'm actually going to hand that question off to Luz if she wants to turn on her camera.
Luz. I don't know about rulings in the case of Caquetá. That's the one that we've been working on, but I believe that, hi, sorry, I'm busy. Son, he's my son, everyone. Okay, well, so the distance between communities and the state, the different branches of power is very big. In this case, because those are peasants that are marginalized, because many of them have grown coca. So different to indigenous communities. I was looking at the chat and there was the peasants as subjects of rights. So part of this is related to that, I mean, when I say peasants, I mean peasantship. So how there have been some conditions in the exclusion, and our findings, this is related that in spite of the agreements, the accords, and in what we have in governance, these communities are perceived as marginalized and like what Mackenzie mentioned, not in the role of control. That's how it is perceived by communities, not like that, but as guaranteeing rights. So I believe that there is a little link, a small link, in particular with what is related to peasant communities in these areas, with jurisprudence, with tools that jurisprudence can provide. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, well, in the chat, we have some questions. Angela is answering them. I invite the assistants, I'm sorry, the attendees to answer them. We have time to answer one question. We're about to finish, but I wanted to ask a question to Tolima group. She says, thank you so much for sharing the website. I'd like to ask you which actions or experiences as videos, newspapers, how does this citizens expressed in the south of Tolima? I can answer. There are different actions. Some of them are more organized, others are less organized, but especially FUPAD. FUPAD has had several actions that pedagogical ones to strengthen citizens. They have conducted workshops at schools with youngsters and I don't know, for example, principals at schools to understand about care of environment. FUPAD and many organizations are peasants organizations, and they have been looking at the importance of the environment and about logging and taking care of water resources, relationship with the animals.
And they're friendly. They want to preserve natural resources. So that's been strong work, and it has created an environmental policy implemented by young people from that organization, FUPAP. It's another organization of women who are coffee growers. They've been working with the schools, sometimes not only showing the coffee process, but also looking at strategies indirectly, how the use of coffee, reforestation, things they've done, the processes to protect the environment. So there are some citizen organizations that have done work. And it's been recognized, the work has been recognized both formally and informally. FUPAP is one of the strong organizations, so I can tell you that more and more, we need to show these initiatives that arise from the daily experiences to generate identity in their territories. The peasants have always lived in their territories. They love it, and they're worried about it. They are concerned about the water sources. It's their source of income of these communities. Thank you, Maria del Pilar. I've pasted in the chat box the link to that organization so that you can visit it, take note of it, and you can visit and know about these experiences in this region. And we're out of time. Unfortunately, it's already 4:33. We have gone over time, but we want to thank the panelists, all of them. Great presentations, interesting work. I feel like going and visiting those regions. I haven't been there. And okay. I also want to thank everyone who joined the sessions of our Congress. These are the last meetings of the conference. So once again, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone. And we hope to meet soon in a future opportunity. I want to thank the organizers of the conference. So having said that, I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you. Great weekend to everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.